Welcome to the Chaos Sector. We return to the Matrix. The trial is approximately 2 months away, and it appears Taylor and Koberger, more importantly, will have to go to trial. Keep in mind, Taylor tried to have the charges dropped throughout this madness, but I think it's best for it to go to trial. That way, the world can see how law enforcement covers up crimes. Someone asked us, who do we think are the killers? It made us ponder for a moment, and well, it brought us back to the beginning of our investigation. We pondered on it, and in the leisure time, we came across a video from 1111 True Crime. In one of her recent videos, she focused on Jack D and Jack S. And we must say, the points she presented are broken down very well. We left a comment on that episode, quote, about to bite his own tongue off. Yep, didn't really focus on this early on, but this may end up being key in trial. Also, Jack's expression to Steve was that of, well, a stalker. Someone who couldn't let go of Kaylee. It was in his eyes. Many claimed that Jack was not 26 years old, but an article stated he was 26. And that article got all of the other information correct about their relationship and family. What we concluded was both families were okay with dating a minor at the time, as long as he respected her, meaning he was 21 and she was 16. In a small town such as Moscow, perhaps, that is not seen as bad. It was basically an arranged marriage, until Kaylee decided to part ways. If Murphy could talk, Jack would be in jail right now. Unquote. And then we decided to review our own investigation regarding these two individuals. Now here is a screenshot of an episode in our investigation discussing this oddity. As you see in the screenshot, it says, quote, Jack Decor, the 26-year-old on again and off again boyfriend of 21-year-old victim Kaylee Gonzalez, was photographed this week with a dog named Murphy. He and Kaylee shared prior to her murder on the morning of Sunday, November 13th in Moscow, Idaho. Unquote. That's one article, then you have another one right below it. Quote, investigators, according to the couple, are wasting their time looking into Jack Decor, 26, their daughter's ex-boyfriend. Unquote. Now obviously we know other articles have him aged at 22 years old, but that's the problem. Why is there a 4-year difference in other articles? And the odd thing in these articles is they have all the other information correct, you understand? They knew they were together for 5 years, they knew they shared a dog named Murphy, and they even have a quote from Christy when she stated they're wasting their time looking into Jack as a potential suspect. So if you have all of this detailed information, how do you not have the correct age of Jack? Some would suggest it's some bogus rag and they don't have their facts straight. But how do you have the correct age of Kaylee, the name of the dog, and a statement from the mother about Jack but not his age? This is not an error. We believe that is his actual age of 26 years old. In fact, he looked a bit older than Kaylee in that screenshot at the corner club. That's right, about 26 years old. What it appears to be is a misdirection of Jack's age, because he would be a bit older and a bit more, well, be involved in a bit more. It's quite fitting as well, because all of the photos of them have him depicted to be a bit green, so to speak. But in that corner club footage, he doesn't look all that green to the chaos, not at all. He looks all grown up, beard filled in, has the image of a mature young man. Now if Jack D is cool with Adam, and Madison told Adam something that made Jack S concerned, and Kaylee also, then this would mean more than likely Adam told Jack D this as well, right? Also, Adam is apparently roommates with Jack D and Jack S. These are 3 males that stay across the street from the victim's home. And there's no way that none of them were unaware of what was going on in that home. So where does this leave us? Well, a breakup weeks prior by Kaylee, who was 5 years younger, Jack expected to marry her, having the quote, popular dame in town by his side, and it ends abruptly. He loses a bit of swag, and everyone says she broke up with you, not the other way around, buddy. Mind you, he's in a fraternity, so he got roasted pretty bad. But that's not enough time, and frat boy teasing for a motive to have her murdered. This was due to an obsession. That breakup, in our opinion, was already in the works, perhaps months prior. If anyone recalls, the media reported that Kaylee had a stalker, but didn't identify anyone, right? We pointed out, if she had a stalker, which she would obviously be aware of, because apparently everyone else was, then this stalker was known to Kaylee. Jack was stalking her, indirectly, you see. He had his buddies stalking her, watching her every move, what new guy she talked to, spotted her laughing with some frat guy trying to get between the two at that time. An obsession while in a relationship, an obsession after the breakup. But he had to make it seem like everything was cool, you see. Oh, we can still be friends, even hang out at the corner club. No hard feelings, except for a shattered heart and dark obsession masked behind that charming smile. It's logical, and that's why we presented that theory in our investigation. Jack D was the ex-boyfriend of Kaylee. He stayed across the street, and he was spotted at the bar earlier with Kaylee and Madison. Now the girls are seen walking down the street with Jack S., who stated, quote, "They're gonna get you for that, Maddie," unquote. The tone of his voice was from a place of concern for Madison's safety. Although it appeared the group seemed to be having a good time prior at the bar, something Madison told Adam was important. We went over this and put everything into context. Jack S. warns Madison that she is going to face a consequence, then she is murdered later. From a detective's perspective, who should have used that as a trail instead of ignoring it? You know what, I can't. That's what pisses me off.
Yeah, it's infuriating when you really think about it. It's literally an unlawful investigation, which is the root of the problem in this case. If someone is warned about something they did or said, and then later on are discovered murdered, what detective would ignore that warning someone gave to that individual? It's not like they didn't know that warning was given negative, they knew. Everyone knew. How do you think we know, you see? They examined that surveillance footage and just quickly swept it under the rug. The only type of detectives who would do such a thing are detectives that are trying to keep the truth, well, under the rug. This is in fact frustrating to go over again. The mainstream media plastered that footage out there, focused on Madison speaking, in which they clipped out the portion of Jack's warning and just played the portion where Kaylee asked her what did she tell Adam, and of course she responded in saying she told Adam everything. Now off this alone, we know that law enforcement also omitted this because there would have been a totally different investigation. Some may claim it wasn't necessarily linked to the murders, but if this were the case, the mainstream media wouldn't have clipped out Jack's warning, and law enforcement would have questioned Jack about that warning. Well, they did it anyway behind closed doors. But the mainstream media went out of their way to depict Jack as a potential suspect early on, remember? But never focused on his warning to Madison. So let's break that down for a moment. Madison tells Adam everything. Since Kaylee is showing concern about what Madison told Adam, then Kaylee is linked to this information. If Jack warns Madison about this information, which wasn't a playful tone whatsoever, then this information is to be taken seriously. And this would mean, of course, that Jack also had this information, which he was concerned about. We came to the conclusion that Madison was so drunk that she told Adam something she wasn't supposed to, which caused Jack to warn her about it, and Kaylee's concern as well. On a side note, being drunk at the level Madison appeared to be eliminates all inhibitions. In other words, Madison's sedated and relaxed state of mind created a carefree attitude about this important information she relayed to Adam. We can all agree here that Jack and Kaylee didn't want this information to come out. Now, let's skip ahead to the Grub truck footage. In that footage, it appears that Madison and Kaylee are simply enjoying themselves, right? Which would indicate that the warning wasn't serious, as Jack himself appeared to be just hanging out. They were all seen laughing and joking, typical college gathering on a Saturday night. But when the girls leave, Jack appeared a bit confused, as if he was supposed to take them home. Many assumed they ditched Jack. That's why they appeared a bit mischievous as they snuck away. That aligns with the big brother narrative, where Madison was drunk, giving Jack a hard time because her boyfriend had him watch over her that night, assuming she would get a bit too drunk. We see them having words in the footage, so it all adds up. Keep in mind, Jack S. is best friends with Madison's boyfriend, Jake Schreiger, who wasn't in town at the time. We came to the conclusion that Jake told Jack to look out for Madison while out on the town, being a big brother, you know. That was our view of Jack S. But we also kept the door open to suggest he was a part of the plot. But then his warning brings us back to the notion he was there to look out for them, as much as he could. Here's the deal. In the theory that this was drug-related, with dangerous individuals snooping around in town, Jack S. can't do much but warn the girls and kinda keep an eye on them while they're out in public. Nobody would do anything to them out in public more than likely. But when they get back home, it's out of Jack's hands because he doesn't have the ability to stop what was planned. We examined his body language after the girls left, and it appeared he was focused on following the girls back home. Some would say it was to make sure he tracked their every move in the plot. Some would say it was to track their every move out of concern. Out of everything we broke down in this investigation, going back damn near 3 years, Jack's warning, if related to their murders, has to be acknowledged and appreciated. because it showed that Jack cared, but he's not capable of really doing anything about the consequences they were facing. He can't snitch, that's suicidal, and he can't snitch to the authorities, that's definitely a no-no. So he was stuck. As for the other Jack, well, he was never clear in our eyes, and had a motive. In our analysis, we came to the conclusion that Jack D was involved. And when you think about the report that Kaylee's wounds were more extreme than Madison's, well, that would be a sign of a concentrated attack upon Kaylee, which is personal. And who else would have such a concentrated attack upon Kaylee than her ex-boyfriend? Olivia came out and executed damage control early on, stating that he wasn't involved. The mother even stated he was 1,000% innocent, and authorities were wasting their time in investigating him. Damage control.
But the father wasn't so eager to rule him out. We didn't really get into the analysis of the memorial, but we did notice the dismissive body language Steve gave Jack D. He went to console the family, hugs the mother, and you would think Steve would reach out to Jack, but instead he walked away without even making eye contact with Jack. Even though they weren't together anymore, Jack was seen as a part of the family. He was with Kaylee for 5 years, right? Yet Steve did not make eye contact with him, and when someone doesn't make eye contact, well, we know that usually indicates there's a problem. Avoiding eye contact could mean Steve wanted to deliberately ignore Jack, showing disappointment, as he is seen as the protector of Kaylee in a sense. I mean, he stayed across the street, and was her ex-boyfriend, who was alleged to have never answered the phone due to being asleep. Another reason would be, Steve simply can't stomach looking in the eyes of someone who, well, is pure evil, in the narrative that he knows Jack had something to do with Kaylee's murder. On 11/11 True Crime's analysis of that moment, she pointed out that Steve had his tongue so far in his cheek, he was about to bite his own tongue off. And of course we responded. This would be due to so much emotion being bottled up, where Steve wanted to give Jack a piece of his mind, but knew the moment was more important for the victims. If we accept the likely possibility that Jack was 26 and Kaylee was 21, then at 21, Jack promised Steve that he would love and protect Kaylee as long as he lives and such. You know, the future husband investment. So it hurt Steve 100 times more to stand on stage with someone who not only failed to do so, but from his view was involved. Any father in that gut-wrenching situation would damn near bite their tongue off also. Keep in mind, Christy stated that she felt it was someone they knew and didn't believe some random person just came into that neighborhood and committed those murders. Of course it was someone they knew, because we know that Xana didn't order DoorDash, but Bonnie ordered it specifically for her. Bingo, that's someone they knew. We know that Batman had the most inconsistent and suspicious accounts during driving the girls back home, who claimed to know them by name, often drove them around town, knew where they worked. That's someone they knew, of at least. We know it was someone they knew, because everyone who was so-called investigated, by Christie's view, were cleared entirely too fast, which indicated that she felt that circle of peers were not thoroughly investigated, which means they could have been involved in the murders or committed them. Now I know many may not like this, but we have to keep coming back to this person. Yeah, we know what many will say in the comments. But based on the accounts, and not the person providing it, Dylan Bonnie, a black male, a pale-skinned male with colorful hair, and an unidentified male with a hoodie on, were all standing outside the home later that morning, smoking marijuana. Well, this would be Dylan, Bonnie, and Clyde, and the pale-skinned male with colorful hair matches the description of Jack D, who has ginger-toned hair and is quite pale-skinned. Then you have another male in a hoodie, which could be Jack Showalter. Now many may refute this claim, but think about it a bit more here. Again, Dot claimed it was the neighbor's claims of what she observed, yet was afraid to be identified or speak out. So they pretended to be a party-goer that night, and claimed to observe those very individuals outside the home later that morning. And we pointed out, of course, that even if Dot has been exposed for lying, grifting in cyberspace and all, no one can prove those individuals were not spotted on the porch later that morning, you see? And it's logical anyway, so that's what the chaos always focused on, the individuals involved, and the setting that morning. WSU Kim basically did the same thing with her daughter, right? She's speaking for someone else, claiming they have certain information. Now if you all just use your common sense, wouldn't you agree that many of those neighbors heard something the night of the murders? Okay, but have any of them spoke out about it? Negative. Wouldn't you agree that many of those neighbors observed something the night of the murders? Okay, but again, have any of them spoke out about it? Nope. Well, the only person who has spoken out is Anand Harsh, who seems to be more of a suspect rather than a witness, if you ask me. What about later that morning? Wouldn't you agree that many of those neighbors observed individuals at that home, including housemates, during the so-called time frame of friends being called over to help? Of course, so when you break it down, Dot is not the focus. It's the information that is essential to the investigation. Keep in mind, a college student spoke out, concealing his identity, explaining how everyone knew about those murders approximately around 8 a.m. But he doesn't stay in that neighborhood, or so it seems. But if everyone knew about those murders that early in the morning, it's logical to suggest that Dylan, Bonnie and Clyde, and both Jacks were seen on the porch by that neighbor. Katie, one of Kaylee's friends, claimed to attempt to contact Kaylee around 10 a.m. to see if she was okay. As we pointed out, why would she assume something was wrong, unless she had been notified that Kaylee was murdered? Again, this would be 10 a.m., before authorities were called at 11:58 a.m. So if Katie knew Kaylee was murdered, and let's be honest, she knew, but perhaps was in a state of denial, which prompted her phone call, if she knew this around 10 a.m., it's safe to say that everyone knew those housemates were murdered around 8 a.m. But that's the college circle in general. There were those who knew about the murders earlier than that, such as in the wee hours of Sunday morning. Like 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., you see? The inner circle definitely knew in the wee hours, and then the outer circle found out a bit later. Those neighbors obviously witnessed a lot, and knew there was violence in that home. But no one was willing to speak out, except for a female who spoke through someone who knew they would be seen as a deceiver. So the truth is revealed, but through the eyes of someone who can't be trusted. Dylan would obviously be at the home, so she's physically there. Jack D stayed across the street, so it's likely he was called to the home. So, he's likely to be at the home that morning. And we justify that even more because it was not reported that Jack was one of the peers who were called over to the home that morning. Hunter was mentioned, but not Jack D, who was not only the ex-boyfriend of one of the victims, but stayed right across the street. You want to know why he wasn't mentioned? Because it looks awfully suspicious that he would be there later that morning, but the girls couldn't get in contact with him prior. So he responds to a call after the murders, but conveniently wasn't able to respond to the calls before the murders. Yeah, that's very suspicious. Just thought about another reason why the neighbor's security footage hasn't been released. That camera is facing directly towards his home, you see? What if Jack was spotted in that surveillance during the time frame the murders occurred? Or even later that morning, heading towards the home. That surveillance footage is a trial. It seals Kohberger's fate. Either he's innocent or guilty, based on what is captured from that specific camera. Even if you disregard that, ponder that scenario they presented. You have Dylan, whose whereabouts prior to the murders were not provided in the police report. This makes her a suspect by default. Then you have Bonnie and Clyde, where Bonnie was the DoorDasher, who clearly was involved based on that plot. Of course, Clyde is right along with her. Then you have Jack D, who is the ex-boyfriend, who stays across the street. Wait, let's make sure we revisit the alibi in connection to that surveillance. Jack was spotted at the corner club, which was approximately 1:30 a.m., right? The girls head to the Grub truck, and we assume Jack, quote, hung around with his buddies for a moment before heading home. Now if we focus on the initial phone call that Kaylee made, which was around 2:30 a.m., his alibi of sleeping would suggest he fell asleep within an hour upon arriving back at home. Not saying it's impossible, but there is no physical way to prove he was asleep during this time frame. And that's the problem with that alibi, because it's so basic and yet so cunning at the same time. If Jack ignores the calls and claims he was asleep, authorities can't prove he ignored the calls, you see? But within the urgency of that time frame, someone in that neighborhood would go knock on his door and inform him that Kaylee was in danger. Mind you, around 3:12 a.m., there were several college students seen running away from that neighborhood in the body cam footage. It's obvious they were either involved or had observed some form of violence. So if they observed something, there's no question somebody would go bam on Jack's door. And then what about the other Jack? Didn't they both reside in that home? Where did Jackass go after he left the Grub truck? We come to the conclusion that these individuals are either directly involved in the murders or simply allowed it to happen out of fear. Jack D, though, has a motive glued to his back, and that keeps him in the hot seat.
There were 3 males that were inside that home. This is a fact. The DNA was collected, and those males were not investigated. One was on November 20th, before Kohberger's alleged DNA was identified, and the other 2 were alleged to be collected December 16th, yet no identity was revealed. And to be honest, those two samples were collected earlier than, but they reported it was December 16th, to align with the timeframe Kohberger's DNA was being matched. Because if it was reported that all three were collected and identified before, I repeat, before, Kohberger's identity was obtained, well obviously it would look like they disregarded those males to focus on one male, yet they did that anyway. And of course there's an excuse to why those males weren't investigated. The way things are set up, you know, we can't upload multiple DNA samples at a time. Once we have one, well, the system can't recognize another one. They claimed that the blood sample was so small that it didn't register or some shit. Well, why didn't you use IgG to identify them the same way, or whatever, it's garbage nonsense. So law enforcement ignored what was right in front of them, which was blood samples of those males left at the crime scene, and went digging into trash in another state to match DNA with Kohberger. Basically, the FBI decided to follow this man across the country for a sample of his DNA in freaking trash cans, but ignore blood samples of DNA left by other males at the scene of the crime? This is brain-numbing corruption right here. The elephant in the room was ignored. Now let's look at all of the unlawful actions of law enforcement here. They ignored those 3 male DNA samples, where blood was discovered on the damn stair rail. They ignored the glove outside with blood on it. They ignored Jack Showalter's warning to Madison. They concealed the evidence from the black coat she wore that night, found on Taylor Avenue. They didn't provide Dylan's whereabouts prior to the murders. They unlawfully arrested and charged a citizen for a crime, before detainment and questioning. They concealed surveillance footage from the public, yet asked that same public for assistance in spotting a vehicle in that surveillance, all the while they already had a specific person being tracked. I mean, look at all of this. This was an unlawful investigation from the beginning because law enforcement decided to protect suspects. And from there, everything going forward will be generated from protecting suspects. And this is why the prosecution hasn't been too vocal in these hearings, specifically Bill Thompson. Because you can only take the frame so far, you know. Eventually you're gonna have to provide the evidence. Oh yeah, they were slick, but not slick enough. You need more WD-40. They thought it would be easy, just collect DNA from his father, arrest him, obtain a cheek swab while in custody, and this is the evidence against the defendant. Wait, don't fast forward through this, Taylor says. How did you obtain a match prior to those DNA samples? Because the first 2 searches did not bring up a result of my client's DNA. Oh, you used IgG next? How do we know you used IgG if you don't provide any resources to the court? For all we know, you're just claiming you found a match through IgG. We need documented proof of this claim, Your Honor. Until the state provides this documented proof that the FBI obtained that match, I ask that the court considers this an allegation, not evidence. In fact, we can't trust that process because the unlawful investigation obtained DNA from my client's father prior to his arrest and obtained DNA from my client after his arrest. He was not brought in for questioning prior to his arrest. Your Honor will uphold the standard of innocent until proven guilty, and before a citizen is brought before a court to determine that, they are treated the same way in society. You can't arrest a citizen without any evidence that they committed a crime. But that's what took place. This was an unlawful arrest, an unlawful investigation, and whatever the prosecution, in partnership with the FBI, have obtained, was also unlawful.
Let me tell you what the prosecution is hoping. Well, for one, they're hoping the IgG sample will stick. But if it doesn't, and this whole thing falls apart, they're gonna blame the FBI for everything. Yep, all is fair in war. Because the FBI is doing the same thing, running off into the shadows after doing their dirty deeds. Bill Thompson will say something like, well, we were told that the DNA discovered on the knife sheath was the defendant's, and it was verified by the FBI through IgG. Yeah, never mind the months of secrecy. Never mind that you ignored the additional male's DNA that was discovered. Heck, even claiming those males' DNA was irrelevant to the trial. Oh my fucking, there's nowhere for the prosecution to hide. Now we have old hag Nancy Grace claiming Kohberger had accomplices due to the additional male's blood left at the crime scene. Don't act like it's new evidence, you fuckface. It always existed, but detectives kept that from the public. And we explained why they did so. It breaks everything wide open. Think about it. Why is this being presented now, in over 2 years of this case? Those DNA samples were already obtained days after, which was over 2 years ago. Now all of a sudden it's revealed that it was blood left in the home, reported this year. The only reason the mainstream media is acting like it's breaking is because Taylor addressed it in the hearing, and she didn't know neither, because that information was concealed up until recently. Instead of old hag Grace considering the possibility that those males committed the murders, she just blabbers out a narrative of Koberger having accomplices in those murders. But then this would change Dylan's accounts, because she would have saw multiple individuals and not just Koberger, right? And you can just put the blood being the DNA left at the home to the side, because it was reported that those males left DNA early in the investigation. So if you claim they were Koberger's accomplices, detectives would have their DNA 2 years prior, and they would be facing the same charges. Yet he's in that courtroom all alone. But I guess that doesn't matter to you, you old witch. Moscow PD wouldn't conceal their identities if they were accomplices of Koberger. The only reason their identities were concealed is because they are the ones who committed the murders or attacks on those housemates. They're from Moscow, so Moscow PD will protect them. It's that simple. Old hag should be taken off the air, damn near 3 years into this case, and she's still pushing the same narrative from the beginning, despite the growing evidence Koberger was framed. The prosecution is slowly conceding they have to release everything Taylor is demanding to obtain. She inquired about those additional males a long time ago, and the prosecution kept kicking the can down the road, hiding everything from her. But this is because the FBI, yep, as always, was trying to keep all of this in the dark. Remember the genealogy expert who testified in a prior hearing? Yep, she revealed how there are loopholes in the system that basically allows you to manufacture an identity match. Guess who took a trip to her home after her testimony? That's right, the FBI. Haven't heard from her since. They intimidated her, she went silent. They intimidated Bethany's lawyer, then the lawyer convinces Bethany not to testify. It is ultimately the FBI who is behind this frame. But the prosecution and Moscow PD have to stand before the court, stand before the nation, and be exposed for the frame. You cannot trust the agency that will eat its own. The FBI is one of the most corrupt government agencies there is, such as trying to frame a man for a crime he didn't commit. And as we mentioned, they will run off into the shadows, not being held accountable for anything. Because after all, they were, quote, just helping local law enforcement, you see. It wasn't their investigation. They were called in to assist. Yeah, they're slippery fuckers. All in all, the judge is not budging on the motions to suppress the IGG. He never will. Another hearing will be set before the trial, and this will keep going on and on. In the meantime, Taylor should put pressure on the prosecution in regards to those bloody DNA samples. That's a corner they can't get out of. And by the time the trial comes around, no motive established for the defendant, cell data placing Koberger in the opposite direction of the alleged path. You have Dylan's fabricated accounts as the star witness, her whereabouts prior to the murders concealed, Bethany's testimony quashed, no investigation into the warning Jack Showalter gave Madison, detectives snooping around on Taylor Avenue with the coat she was wearing, concealing evidence, bloody DNA from other males not investigated, lack of information regarding the IGG, and no surveillance showing Koberger's vehicle in the neighborhood. And Taylor is fully loaded, but she has to make sure it is not all about the IGG process. Attack from all angles overwhelmed the judge with so much that he has to accept the facts and evidence of the case. Where we center our attention, unlike others it seems, is the 3 individuals who are at the center of attention in our analysis: Bonnie, Clyde, and Dylan. These individuals are the key. There was a footprint that was only discovered using luminol, and we all know in that house there was a lot of DNA of many college students. And this is what makes it that much more irrational that a trace of Koberger's DNA was discovered on a knife sheath button. And that knife sheath wasn't discovered upon entrance into that bedroom. It was so-called discovered hours later. More like it was planted there hours later. Speaking of hours later, we go back to the time frame of when the murders occurred. We're focusing on Dylan at this point because it's evident that Bethany is not paired with her as surviving housemates. They're not Pi-Phi sisters neither. Only Bethany was out of the 2. Dylan obviously was awake and aware of the attacks. From the time those murders occurred until 11:58 a.m., this is approximately 8 hours. She calls Bonnie and Clyde early in the morning. They get rid of the drugs first. Getting rid of the drugs, well, it eliminates any charge for them, but it also erases any trail, such as a motive for those murders. And since Bonnie and Clyde were involved and had their stash in that home, they got their product out before the authorities could link them to the murders. Their DNA is in that home for sure. I don't think they are the killers, but the motive behind those murders they definitely are tied to. We can suggest they were the cleanup crew, and Dylan was their stooge. Their charges were dropped, and it wasn't clarified in the public court documents as to why the case was dismissed. Because they took a deal under the table. That's why. Let us out, and we'll be your stooges. But this is where you get in a jam because now your operations, which are set up in the victim's home, pulls those housemates into your fuckery. Could this be what Madison told Adam? Wait, let's scratch the previous theory for a moment. Did she tell him that Bonnie and Clyde became informants and they need to get rid of the drugs in the house before it's raided? Somebody had dumped Bonnie and Clyde's stash some time prior, and even though they became informants, it was still their product, which is actually their boss's product, you see? And well, the boss doesn't care who those students were, doesn't care about TikTok, any of that. They only care about the money and product they lost. Jack S was called, and let's say Jack D was called later that night, and both of them decided to not answer the phone. Because they would be placed in a position to help during that time frame. Even if Jack D wasn't a part of the conspiracy, he knew what would happen. That's why he stayed away from it, but came to the house later that morning with Dylan, Bonnie, and Clyde, and even Showalter, all outside smoking marijuana, trying to block everything out. We examined the audio that many claimed was fake from the neighbor's camera, and Bonnie's name is heard. And there is a black male's voice heard, and another male stating, quote, "Do we have a problem here?" unquote. Now everyone came out and debunked it, and claimed some guy basically used a soundboard to reenact that night. If so, why wasn't he charged with a crime? If a content creator can get their channel reported for their opinion in the case, surely someone creating fake audio of the massacre should face some type of punishment, right? I guess not. And the reason why is because that audio is from that neighbor's camera. Once again, this is why that footage has never been released. Mind you, Moscow PD claimed a whimper was heard. The dog barking and a loud thud noise was heard from that very security camera. As we pointed out, do you honestly think that's all that security camera heard with that type of violence in the home? Negative. It would align with that audio that was leaked out. In that audio, someone was on the phone with Bonnie, telling her to get over there. This would be one of those neighbors next door. You see, everyone in that neighborhood knew Bonnie and Clyde. They knew that house was basically a trap house, and that those housemates were being used for it. Many try to make it seem that we're blaming the victims, in saying they were involved in criminal activity. Negative, we're dealing with reality. You have to be honest, even if you're incorrect about something. Those housemates were obviously associated with criminal activity. It doesn't mean they themselves were criminals, or at least have criminal lifestyles. But when you associate yourself with criminals, they attach their lifestyles onto you. And either you disassociate yourself from them, or end up in compromising situations. We are not some fan club of Kobagar. Anyone knows the chaos. We just expose deception and guide people to the truth. Corruption is what we want the masses to be aware of. Because this person is an example of how one day you can be working hard in life, and then next you're behind bars for a crime you didn't commit. We'll get the book once it comes out. This is the chaos sector.